For years, fans of MASH believed the cast left the show because they had simply grown tired of it, that after 11 long seasons, it was just time to move on. But in her final interviews before her passing, Loretta Swit, the woman who brought Major Margaret Hot Lips Houlihan to life, revealed something far more shocking. It wasn't exhaustion. It wasn't money. It was something much deeper and much darker that tore the cast apart from within. Swit, who had witnessed the series evolve from lighthearted comedy to emotional war drama, hinted that behind the laughter and applause were bitter creative feuds, secret heartbreaks and moral conflicts that no one dared to speak of publicly. One by one, beloved stars began walking away. Gary Berghoff, Wayne Rogers, McLean Stevenson, and fans were left heartbroken and confused. According to Swit, the truth behind their exits was never about contracts or careers. It was about pain, loss, and disillusionment with the show's growing emotional weight. She described how the boundaries between fiction and reality began to blur, how the war they pretended to live in every day began to eat away at their souls. Before her passing, Loretta finally broke her silence. And what she confessed about her co-stars, and the real reason so many of them left, will change the way you see MASH forever. When MASH first premiered in 1972, no one expected it to become one of the most beloved and longest-running television series in history. The show struck a rare balance, using humor to explore the brutal realities of war. Viewers fell in love with its sharp writing, emotional depth, and unforgettable characters. And at the heart of it all was Loretta Swit, whose portrayal of Major Margaret Hot Lips Houlihan transformed from a comedic stereotype into one of television's most complex women. In those early years, the set of MASH felt like a family. Alan Alda, Wayne Rogers, McLean Stevenson, and Loretta Swit shared genuine camaraderie. Between takes, the cast laughed, improvised, and bonded over meals, often staying late to rehearse or tweak scenes. But what fans didn't see was how this very closeness became strained as the show grew darker in tone. Loretta once said in an interview, "We weren't just acting, we were living in that war zone every day." The emotional weight of the show began to take a toll. MASH was filmed during the height of the Vietnam War, and though the series was set in Korea, everyone on set knew the parallels were intentional. The scripts became heavier, exploring themes of death, trauma, and moral conflict. Wayne Rogers, who played Trapper John, began to feel suffocated by the creative direction. He wanted a more balanced portrayal of his character, not just as Hawkeye's sidekick. When his concerns were dismissed, he quietly decided to leave the show after the third season. McLean Stevenson soon followed, admitting that his decision was driven by frustration with how little creative input he had. Loretta Swit watched her co-stars depart one by one. She recalled how the laughter on set slowly faded, replaced by exhaustion and quiet resentment. "We loved the show," she said, "but we were starting to lose ourselves in it." Alan Alda, meanwhile, began to take on more creative control, writing and directing several episodes. While many admired his passion, others felt overshadowed. The once unified cast started to fracture, and behind-the-scenes tensions became impossible to ignore. Still, the show went on, and audiences never saw the turmoil. Ratings soared, awards piled up, and the cast continued delivering powerful performances. But Loretta later admitted that every episode felt heavier than the last. "It wasn't just acting anymore," she said softly in her final interview. "It was therapy for some and torment for others." By the time MASH entered its final seasons, many original cast members were gone, replaced by new faces who brought fresh energy but couldn't replicate the original magic. Loretta, one of the few remaining originals, felt the weight of keeping the spirit alive. "We were telling stories that mattered," she said, "but we were breaking apart while doing it." It was the beginning of the end, and although fans adored the show's final years, for Loretta and her castmates it was no longer just television. It was a painful reflection of how art and reality can intertwine until one consumes the other. As the seasons passed, the cracks in MASH's once perfect surface deepened. Loretta Swit often said that the departures of her co-stars hit her harder than she ever admitted publicly. Each goodbye left an emotional scar, and behind every exit was a story few fans ever truly knew. Wayne Rogers was the first major loss. His decision to leave wasn't sudden. It had been brewing quietly for months. Rogers felt his character, Trapper John, was never given the emotional or creative depth he deserved. In interviews years later, he admitted that he and Alan Alda had developed a subtle, creative rivalry, not rooted in dislike, but in frustration. Rogers wanted equal footing, but Alda's growing influence on the show made that impossible. Loretta recalled, Wayne didn't want to be anyone's sidekick. He wanted to tell his own story. When he left, it broke the rhythm of the show, and left Loretta worried that it would never be the same again. Then came McLean Stevenson's departure, which shocked everyone. He had played Colonel Henry Blake with warmth and humor, embodying the heart of the unit. But as the scripts grew darker, Stevenson felt trapped in a character that wasn't evolving. He confided in Loretta that he wanted more, a chance to explore other roles, other worlds beyond the 477th. Yet his exit was handled in a way that devastated both the cast and the audience. When Henry Blake's plane was shot down in the season finale, no one on set had been told beforehand. The genuine grief seen on screen was real. Loretta said later, "That day changed everything. The laughter we used to share, it just wasn't the same after that." Gary Berghoff's departure as Radar O'Reilly added another layer of heartbreak. Berghoff had been with MASH from the beginning, but the emotional intensity of the show, along with long hours and personal struggles, took a toll on him. Sweet described Gary as one of the most sensitive people on set, deeply affected by the show's themes. When he left, it wasn't just another actor saying goodbye. It felt like the heart of the show was being torn out. The exits left those who remained questioning everything, their purpose, their energy, and even their connection to the work they once loved. Alan Alda, now the creative anchor, tried to keep the spirit alive, but tensions simmered beneath the surface. Some admired his leadership. Others felt overwhelmed by it. Through it all, Loretta Swit stayed. She had opportunities to leave. She was offered other roles, even film contracts, but something held her there. "I wasn't ready to say goodbye," she once said. It felt like leaving would mean giving up on the people we'd lost. But as the departures continued, Loretta started to understand the real reason so many of her friends had walked away. It wasn't fame, money, or ego. It was the emotional cost of playing wounded soldiers and weary doctors for more than a decade. The line between acting and reality had blurred completely. Behind the laughter that millions saw on screen, there was a quiet sadness that only the cast felt. And as Loretta later admitted, "We were pretending to fix people every week, but we couldn't fix ourselves." By the 8th season of MASH, the show had already become a cultural phenomenon, winning Emmy Awards and breaking records. Yet, behind the accolades, the emotional exhaustion among the cast had reached its peak. Loretta Swit once admitted that even though audiences still saw humor, the actors were silently carrying a kind of grief that few outside the set could understand. Every episode asked them to revisit war, trauma, and loss, week after week, year after year. For Loretta, the transformation of her character from the brash, hot lips to a compassionate, battle-weary nurse mirrored her own emotional journey. "Margaret started out tough," she said, "but by the end, she was broken, and so was I." Alan Alda, who had taken creative control, pushed for more realism. He wanted MASH to reflect not just the absurdity of war, but the deep wounds it left behind. His intentions were noble, but for the cast, reliving those heavy stories became emotionally draining. They filmed scenes about death, guilt, and morality so intense that many couldn't shake them off even after leaving the set. Jamie Farr, who played Klinger, once confessed that the shift from comedy to emotional drama affected everyone's spirit. "We were supposed to make people laugh," he said, "but we were also breaking their hearts, and sometimes our own." Loretta noticed how the atmosphere changed after every major episode. There were fewer jokes between takes, fewer smiles in the dressing rooms. What had once been a joyful creative playground now felt like a therapy session none of them signed up for. Some actors began taking long breaks between seasons, while others completely detached from the show when cameras stopped rolling. Still, Loretta stayed, loyal, passionate, and determined to give her character the ending she deserved. But she couldn't ignore the toll it was taking. Friends she had shared laughter with were now distant. Late-night conversations on set turned into quiet silences. The show's writers and producers were aware of the emotional fatigue, but pushed forward, believing that MASH's realism was what made it timeless. They weren't wrong. The show's later seasons produced some of television's most powerful storytelling. But for the people behind those stories, the realism cut too deep. Loretta later reflected that by the final years, MASH wasn't just about fictional characters anymore. We were mourning our own innocence, she said. The war on screen became a reflection of our own battles inside. Even after the cameras stopped, the cast carried that heaviness with them. Some struggled to find joy in their next projects, while others quietly withdrew from Hollywood altogether. Loretta, meanwhile, kept the show close to her heart, but confessed in her final years that the emotional toll never truly left her. "I gave MASH everything I had," she said softly, "but it took a piece of me I never got back." It was a haunting admission, one that revealed why so many of her co-stars had to walk away. They weren't abandoning MASH. They were saving themselves. In her final interviews, Loretta Swit spoke with the same strength and grace that made her a beloved figure in television history. But as she reflected on her years on MASH, there was a tenderness in her voice, a mix of pride, sorrow, and the unmistakable weight of truth. For decades, fans had wondered why so many of their favorite cast members had walked away from one of the most successful shows ever made. And at last, Loretta confirmed what had long been suspected. They didn't leave because of fame, money, or ego. They left because MASH had taken too much from them emotionally. She revealed that filming scenes of loss and despair for 11 years changed how they all saw life and death. "When you live in that world for so long," she said, "you start to carry the pain home with you." The laughter that echoed through the 4077th tense on screen hid the reality of exhaustion and heartbreak behind the camera. Loretta admitted that even long after the show ended, she would dream of the set, the smell of the stage, the sound of helicopters, and the faces of friends who had already moved on. She also spoke lovingly of those who left early. There was no resentment, only understanding. "They had to protect themselves," she said. "You can only live inside that kind of sorrow for so long before it changes you." Her compassion for her co-stars was clear. She never blamed anyone for leaving, only the intensity of the show that made it impossible to stay. When MASH finally aired its 2-hour finale in 1983, over 100 million people tuned in, a record that still stands. The cast reunited for one last emotional goodbye, and for many, including Loretta, it felt like laying a part of themselves to rest. "It was the end of an era," she said, "but it was also the end of who we were." In the years that followed, Loretta continued to advocate for veterans, animal rights, and causes close to her heart. She carried herself with dignity, always proud of her work, but unafraid to admit the price it came with. "MASH was a masterpiece," she said, "but masterpieces often come from pain." Her passing marked the end of a living connection to the show's golden years. Yet, through her final words, fans finally understood what MASH had truly meant, not just a sitcom about war, but a reflection of human endurance, loss, and love. Loretta Swit's honesty gave closure to millions who had grown up with the series. Her revelation, that the cast left because the emotional burden became unbearable, reshaped how people viewed the laughter and tears of MASH. It wasn't just television. It was truth disguised as comedy, and now as fans revisit those iconic episodes, they do so with a deeper understanding. Behind every joke, every smile, and every tear was a cast fighting to keep their humanity intact. Loretta Swit's confession was more than an explanation. It was a tribute to everyone who gave a piece of their soul to one of television's greatest stories. Even in her final days, she said it best. MASH taught us that even in war or in pain, there's still room for compassion. But compassion always comes with a cost.